Lesson 1. The nature of ecology. Let us begin with the definition itself. Ecology is scientifically defined as the study of the interactions between organisms and their environment. It is crucial to distinguish this from environmentalism. Environmentalism is a social and political movement dedicated to protecting the natural world. Ecology, however, is a quantitative science. It is not about saving nature, it is about understanding how nature functions. It relies on data, observation, and the testing of hypotheses. It asks not, should we save this forest, but rather, how does this forest grow, cycle nutrients, and support diversity? To understand ecology, we must visualize the hierarchy of life. Picture a ladder in your mind. At the bottom rung is the individual. This is the single organism, the single pine tree, the single wolf, or the single bacterium. At this level, ecology studies how that one individual survives its specific conditions. How does it handle heat? How does it find water? Move up one rung on the ladder. You now see the population. A population is defined as a group of individuals of the same species living in the same area at the same time. It is not just one wolf, but the entire pack. Here, the questions change. We are no longer asking how the wolf stays warm. We are asking, is the pack growing or shrinking? What is the ratio of males to females? Climb higher still. The next rung is the community. This is where the picture becomes complex. A community consists of all the populations of different species interacting in one area. Now, the wolf pack is interacting with the elk herd it hunts, the pine trees that provide cover, and the soil bacteria that decompose the waste. We are studying competition, predation, and symbiosis. Above the community sits the ecosystem. This is a critical leap. An ecosystem includes the living community, the biotic factors, but adds the non-living or abiotic factors. We are now considering the rocks, the sunlight, the rainfall, the nitrogen in the soil, and the temperature of the air. We are looking at how energy flows from the sun into the grass, into the elk, and finally into the wolf. Finally, at the very top of the ladder, is the biosphere. This is the global sum of all ecosystems. It is the thin layer of life that wraps around our planet like the skin of an apple. It includes the atmosphere, the lithosphere, or rock, and the hydrosphere, or water. Let that hierarchy settle in your mind. Individual, population, community, ecosystem, biosphere. To understand where these ideas come from, we must look back to the 19th century. The term ecology was coined in 1866 by the German biologist Ernst Haeckel. He was a contemporary of Charles Darwin and was deeply influenced by the theory of evolution. Haeckel combined two Greek words to create the name. The first is oikos, meaning household or home. The second is logos, meaning the study of. Therefore, ecology is, quite literally, the study of nature's household. It is the study of who lives where, what they do to maintain the house, and how they interact with their neighbors. For a long time, ecology was simply natural history. It was descriptive. A scientist would walk into a forest and write down what they saw. There are oaks here and squirrels there. But in the 20th century, it evolved into a rigorous, mathematical science. It began to ask, why? Why do penguins live only in the southern hemisphere and not in the Arctic, despite the Arctic being cold and icy? This is a question of biogeography and physiological limits. It turns out, penguins evolved in the south and simply never crossed the warm tropical waters of the equator to reach the north. The household of the penguin is defined by history and temperature barriers. Consider the complexity of a simple pond. To the casual observer, it is just water and weeds. To the ecologist, it is a battlefield and a factory. The sun strikes the surface, powering algae. This is primary production. The algae are eaten by zooplankton, tiny drifting animals. These are eaten by small fish, which are eaten by large bass. This is the trophic structure. But what happens when the base dies? It sinks. Bacteria decompose it, releasing phosphorus back into the water, which feeds the algae. The loop closes. This cyclic movement of matter is a fundamental law of the universe that ecology seeks to map. Why does this matter to you, resting there in the dark? Because you are a biological entity. You are part of a population. You live in a community. You rely on an ecosystem. Understanding the nature of ecology allows us to manage our own resources, our own household, more effectively. When we study the spread of a virus, we are studying population ecology. We track the density of the hosts, us, and the transmission rates. When we manage a fishery to ensure we don't catch all the tuna, we are using models of population growth. When we worry about plastic in the ocean, we are studying the disruption of the biosphere. Ecology is the instruction manual for the planet we live on. Without it, we are flying blind. The definition is now clear. The ladder of complexity is established in your mind. You understand that we are looking at a system of interactions, not just a collection of objects, but interactions cannot happen in a void. They must happen somewhere. Life requires a stage. It requires a set of physical conditions, temperature, light, moisture, that allow the chemistry of survival to function. With the definition of our science established, we must now look at that stage. We must turn our eyes to the non-living world that dictates the rules of the game. Our next lesson explores the abiotic factors that surround us. Lesson 2. The physical environment. In this hour, we turn our attention away from the living to the non-living. We will explore the abiotic factors, the climate, the soil, the water, and the light that dictate where organisms can survive. Life does not exist in a vacuum. It is constrained, shaped, and sometimes crushed by the physical world. Let your breathing slow down as we look at the planet, not as a collection of animals, but as a machine of wind, rock, and sun. The most dominant physical factor in ecology is climate. It is important to distinguish climate from weather. Weather is chaotic. It is the state of the atmosphere. At a specific moment, a rainstorm on a Tuesday, or a hot afternoon in July. Climate, however, is the long-term average. It is the predictable pattern of weather over decades and centuries. Life evolves in response to climate, not weather. The engine of Earth's climate is the sun, but the sun does not strike the Earth evenly. Because our planet is a sphere, the equator receives direct, concentrated sunlight, while the poles receive sunlight at a low, glancing angle. This unequal heating creates a massive imbalance. The equator is hot, the poles are cold. Nature hates imbalance, and so the atmosphere moves to correct it. This movement creates the global wind patterns. Visualize the Earth. At the equator, the hot air rises. As it rises, it cools and releases its moisture as rain. This is why the equator is ringed by lush, wet rainforests. But what goes up must come down. This massive column of air, now dry and cool, travels north and south, sinking back to the surface at roughly 30 degrees latitude. As it sinks, it sucks up moisture, creating arid conditions. This circulation loop is called a Hadley cell. If you look at a map, you will see that the world's great deserts, the Sahara, the Arabian, the Kalahari, are all located around these 30-degree lines. This is not an accident. It is the physics of the atmosphere dictating where life can flourish and where it must struggle. Beyond the air, we must look at the ground. We call this the edaphic factor, or simply, the soil. To the non-ecologist, soil is just dirt, but to us, it is a living matrix. Soil is formed through a process called pedogenesis, a slow dance between the parent material, the bedrock, and the climate over thousands of years. It is composed of layers, or horizons. The top layer is rich in organic matter, the rotting remnants of life. Below that are minerals leached from above, and at the bottom is the rock itself. The quality of this soil determines the quality of the ecosystem. A tropical rainforest actually has very poor soil because the heavy rains wash the nutrients away. The nutrients are locked in the trees, not the ground. In contrast, the grasslands of the American Midwest have deep, rich soils built up by centuries of dying grass roots, making them the breadbasket of the world. Let us go deeper into how these physical factors limit life. In ecology, we use the law of tolerance. This law states that for every physical factor, be it temperature, humidity, salinity, or pH, an organism has a specific range within which it can survive. Picture a bell curve. In the center is the optimum range. Here, the organism thrives, grows, and reproduces. As you move away from the center, you enter the zone of physiological stress. Here, the organism can survive, but it is unhappy. It stops reproducing. It devotes all its energy just to staying alive. If you move even further out, you hit the zone of intolerance. Here, the organism dies. A perfect example of this is the coral reef. Corals are animals that have a very narrow range of tolerance for temperature. They thrive in warm, tropical waters, but if the water temperature rises by just 1 or 2 degrees Celsius, they enter the zone of stress. They expel the symbiotic algae living inside them, a process called bleaching. If the heat persists, they enter the zone of intolerance and die. The physical environment is an unforgiving gatekeeper. We must also consider the role of microclimates. The climate reported on the news is the macroclimate, but an insect living under a rotting log experiences a totally different world. Under that log, the humidity might be 100%, and the temperature might be 10 degrees cooler than the air just a few feet away. These microclimates allow organisms to survive in areas where the general climate would kill them. A salamander can live in a dry forest only because it never leaves the damp microclimate of the leaf litter. Why does understanding the physical environment matter? Because everything we do as a civilization is an attempt to manipulate these factors. Agriculture is essentially the modification of the physical environment. When we irrigate a field, we are artificially changing the precipitation regime. When we add fertilizer, we are altering the soil chemistry. When we build a greenhouse, we are creating a microclimate. Furthermore, this knowledge is central to understanding our current global crisis. Climate change is not just about getting warmer. It is about shifting the geographic location of those optimal ranges we discussed. As the planet warms, the optimal range for a sugar maple tree moves north. If the tree cannot migrate fast enough to keep up with its moving climate envelope, it will perish. We are seeing the physical zones of tolerance shifting under our feet, forcing all of life to move or die. Consider also the design of our cities. Concrete and asphalt absorb heat, creating urban heat islands. A city can be significantly hotter than the surrounding countryside. This is an anthropogenic, or human-made, modification of the physical environment. By understanding how surface materials absorb and release solar energy, ecologists and architects can design cooler, more livable cities, using white roofs or green parks to mimic natural cooling processes. You now understand the stage. You see the Hadley cells spinning in the atmosphere, creating bands of forest and desert. You see the soil developing slowly beneath the grass. You understand that every organism is trapped within its zone of tolerance, forever seeking that sweet spot where temperature and moisture are just right. But the physical environment is only half the story. The stage is set, but the actors must now perform. How does a living thing actually cope with these harsh realities? How does a kangaroo rat survive without water? How does a penguin keep warm on the ice? We must zoom in from the planet to the individual. We must look at the machinery of life itself. Our next lesson explores the internal mechanisms that allow organisms to battle the elements. Lesson 3. Physiological Ecology. Here, we examine the internal machinery of life. We ask, how does a living thing actually survive the harsh world we just described? How does a lizard survive in a desert where the air is hot enough to bake bread? How does a pine tree survive a winter that freezes water into stone? We are moving from the stage to the actor. We are looking at the biological engine that keeps the lights on when the storm is raging outside. Breathe slowly and picture the beating heart of a single animal in a vast wilderness. The central pillar of physiological ecology is a concept called homeostasis. This word comes from Greek roots meaning same and steady. Homeostasis is the ability of an organism to maintain a stable internal environment despite a fluctuating external environment. Think of your own body. Outside, the temperature might drop to freezing or rise to heatwave levels. Yet, your internal body temperature remains locked at roughly 37 degrees Celsius. Your blood pH remains steady. Your salt levels remain constant. This is homeostasis. It is a state of dynamic equilibrium, a constant, invisible struggle to stay the same. To maintain this stability, organisms must engage in exchange with their surroundings. They must take in energy and materials, and they must release waste and heat. The two most critical challenges they face are temperature regulation and water balance. Let us look first at temperature. Organisms are generally divided into two broad categories based on how they manage heat. First, there are the ectotherms. These are the cold-blooded animals, reptiles, amphibians, and insects. They rely on external sources of heat. They do not burn food to keep warm. They use the sun. Picture a lizard basking on a rock in the morning. It is essentially charging its battery. It flattens its body to absorb more solar radiation. When it gets too hot, it moves into the shade. Ectotherms are energy efficient. They don't need much food because they don't waste energy on heating. However, they are slaves to the weather. If it is too cold, they cannot move. Second, there are the endotherms. These are the birds and mammals, including you. We generate heat internally through metabolism. We burn food to keep our furnaces running. This allows us to be active at night or in the freezing cold. We are masters of our own temperature, but the cost is high. An endotherm needs much more food than an ectotherm of the same size. A lion must eat constantly. A crocodile can go months without a meal. Now consider water balance. Life is essentially chemistry happening in water. If an organism dries out, the chemistry stops. For plants, this is a dangerous balancing act. To grow, a plant needs carbon dioxide from the air. To get it, it must open tiny pores on its leaves called stomata. Here is the dilemma. When the stomata open to let carbon dioxide in, water vapor rushes out. This is called transpiration. It is an unavoidable trade-off. The plant must decide, do I starve for carbon or do I die of thirst? Plants have evolved complex physiological triggers to close these pores the moment water becomes scarce, prioritizing survival over growth. Let us deepen our understanding by looking at extreme adaptations. The environment is rarely kind, and organisms have evolved fascinating ways to bend the rules. Consider the kangaroo rat, a small rodent living in the deserts of the American Southwest. It lives in a world almost devoid of water. Yet, remarkably, it can survive its entire life without ever drinking a single drop of free water. How is this possible? It obtains all the moisture it needs from the seeds it eats. When your body burns carbohydrates like the starch in a seed, it produces energy, carbon dioxide, and water. This is called metabolic water. For you and me, this is just a drop in the bucket. But for the kangaroo rat, it is enough. To make this work, its kidneys are super efficient. Humans produce dilute urine, wasting water to flush out toxins. The kangaroo rat produces urine so concentrated it is almost a paste. It loses almost nothing. Its physiology is a fortress against the desert sun. This brings us to the concept of the ecological niche. You may have heard this term used to mean an animal's job or address, but in physiological ecology, we define the niche as an n-dimensional hypervolume. Imagine a graph. One axis is temperature, another is humidity, another is food size. The niche is the specific volume of space on that graph where the organism can survive and reproduce. It is the sum total of all its physiological limits. The kangaroo rat has a different physiological niche than the desert tortoise, even though they live in the same place. The tortoise retreats into its shell to conserve water. The rat retreats into its burrow. They solve the same problem with different tools. We must also mention acclimatization. This is a short-term physiological change that happens within an individual's lifetime. If you climb Mount Everest, your body will eventually produce more red blood cells to capture scarce oxygen. This is not evolution. Your DNA has not changed. It is a flexible physiological response, a temporary adjustment to a new reality. Why is physiological ecology important to us? Because it is the basis of our food supply. Agriculture is the management of plant physiology. When scientists try to develop drought-resistant crops, they are doing physiological ecology. They are trying to breed wheat or corn that acts more like the kangaroo rat crops that can keep their stomata open and continue photosynthesis even when the soil is dry. They are trying to expand the zone of tolerance for our food sources so that we can feed a warming world. Furthermore, this field helps us predict the impacts of climate change on wildlife. If we know the physiological heat limit of a specific species of trout, we can predict exactly which rivers will become uninhabitable for them as water temperatures rise. We can see the invisible line of death moving upstream. We also see these principles in medicine. The study of how animals survive freezing, like the wood frog, which essentially turns into a block of ice in winter and thaws out alive in spring, is guiding research into organ preservation. If we could understand the antifreeze proteins in the frog's blood, we might be able to freeze human organs for transplant without damaging them. You have now journeyed inside the organism. You have seen the stomata opening and closing like tiny mouths on a leaf. You have felt the metabolic furnace of the endotherm. You understand that survival is a constant act of balancing the internal world against the external world. But an individual does not live forever. Its physiology will eventually fail. For life to persist, the individual must pass its blueprint on to the next generation. The struggle we have just described shapes that blueprint. The ones who manage their water best, the ones who regulate their heat most efficiently, they are the ones who survive to reproduce. Individual success leads to genetic change. Short-term survival leads to long-term adaptation. Our next lesson takes us into the deep time of biology. We move from the lifespan of a single animal to the lifespan of a species. Lesson 4. Evolutionary Ecology. We now bridge the gap between two of the greatest sciences: ecology, the study of the house, and evolution, the study of how the tenants change. This lesson is titled Evolutionary Ecology. Here we do not just look at how an animal lives today. We ask how it came to be this way. We look at the long, slow pressure of the environment that molds flesh and bone into tools for survival. Relax your mind and prepare to think in centuries and millennia. At the heart of this lesson is the engine of all biological change: natural selection. Though often misunderstood as a violent struggle, natural selection is actually a simple, statistical certainty. It requires 3 ingredients to function. First, there must be variation. Look at a crowd of people or a field of sunflowers. No two individuals are identical. Some are taller, some are faster, some have deeper roots. Second, there must be heritability. These traits must be passed down from parent to offspring through DNA. If a trait is just an accident of birth, like a scar, it dies with the individual. It does not matter to evolution. Third, there must be differential survival. This is the harsh truth of ecology. Not everyone makes it. The environment is a filter. Some individuals will survive and reproduce because of their traits, and others will die without issue because of theirs. When you mix these 3 ingredients, variation, heritability, and differential survival change is inevitable. The population will slowly shift to look like the survivors. In an ecological context, we measure this success with a single metric called fitness. Be careful with this word. In the gym, fitness means strength. In evolutionary ecology, fitness has a precise mathematical definition. It is the genetic contribution an individual makes to future generations. The strongest lion on the savannah has 0 fitness if he is sterile. The smaller, weaker lion who fathers 10 cubs has higher fitness. Ecology is a game where the only way to win is to leave more of yourself behind. This drive to increase fitness leads to adaptive radiation. Imagine a single species of bird landing on a remote archipelago of islands. There are no other birds there. Some islands have insects, others have seeds, others have fruit. Over time, the single species splits. One group develops thin beaks to catch insects. Another develops heavy beaks to crack seeds. From one ancestor, many forms radiate outward to fill the available ecological niches. Let us deepen our understanding by looking at the types of selection that shape populations. Nature sculpts life in different ways depending on the environmental pressure. First, imagine a scenario where the environment changes in a specific direction. Perhaps the climate is getting colder. This leads to directional selection. The individuals at one extreme of the curve, those with the thickest fur, survive best. The entire bell curve of the population shifts to the right. The average bear becomes hairier. This is the most common form of evolution during times of environmental upheaval. Now, imagine a stable environment. The climate is constant. the predators are known. This leads to stabilizing selection. Here, the extremes are punished. If a baby bird is too small, it freezes. If it is too large, its parents cannot feed it enough. The average individual is the winner. The curve gets narrower and taller. Evolution is working hard to keep things exactly the same. Finally, there is disruptive selection. This is rare but powerful. Imagine a landscape with black volcanic rocks and white sand, but no grey rocks. A grey mouse would be visible on both surfaces and eaten. Only the very black mice and the very white mice survive. The population splits into two distinct groups, eventually becoming two different species. This is how diversity is born from division. A classic textbook example of these forces in action is Darwin's finches in the Galapagos Islands. In 1977, a severe drought struck the island of Daphne Major. The small, soft seeds that the birds usually ate disappeared. All that remained were large, hard, thorny seeds. The ecologists Peter and Rosemary Grant watched as a tragedy unfolded. The small beaked birds could not crack the hard seeds. They died by the hundreds. Only the birds with the largest, deepest beaks could eat. In just one generation, the average beak size of the population increased significantly. This was not a theory. It was evolution happening in real time, measurable with a ruler. Why does evolutionary ecology matter to you? Because we are currently forcing the natural world to evolve at a breakneck pace, often to our own detriment. The most urgent example is antibiotic resistance. When you take an antibiotic, you are unleashing a massive selective pressure on the bacteria in your body. You kill 99% of them, but if one bacterium has a random mutation that makes it resistant to the drug, it survives. It now has the entire field to itself. It reproduces, creating a new population composed entirely of resistant superbugs. This is evolutionary ecology happening inside our hospitals. We are engaging in an arms race with bacteria, and because they reproduce every 20 minutes, they are evolving faster than we can invent new drugs. We see the same dynamic in agriculture. We spray pesticides to kill insects. The susceptible insects die. The resistant ones survive and breed. Soon, the pesticide is useless. We are unwittingly breeding superpests through the mechanism of natural selection. Understanding these principles allows us to manage these risks. For example, doctors now recommend antibiotic stewardship, using drugs only when necessary to reduce the selective pressure. Farmers use refuge as patches of untreated fields to allow non-resistant insects to survive and mate with the resistant ones, diluting the resistance genes. These are management strategies derived directly from evolutionary theory. You now understand the engine of change. You see that life is fluid, constantly molding itself to fit the shape of the environment. You understand that the physical world we studied earlier is the hammer, and life is the metal on the anvil. But survival is not just about genetics and beak size. Survival is also about choices. Every day, an animal must make decisions. Where should I hunt? Who should I mate with? Should I fight this intruder or run away? These decisions are not random, they are calculated. From the slow, deep time of evolution, we now zoom into the rapid-fire decision-making of the present moment. We move from the body to the mind. Our next lesson explores the economics of animal behavior. Lesson 5, Behavioral Ecology. Here, we ask why an animal behaves the way it does. Why does a bird sing at dawn? Why does a lioness hunt in a group while a leopard hunts alone? Why does a squirrel risk its life to warn others of a hawk? We are not just cataloguing actions, we are looking for the evolutionary logic behind them. We are assuming that behavior, just like a beak or a claw, is a tool for survival. Relax your mind and imagine you are a silent observer in a vast, complex world of decision-making. To understand animal behavior, we must first understand that every action has a cost and a benefit. The currency of this economy is energy and risk. A central theory in this field is optimal foraging theory. This theory suggests that natural selection has shaped animals to forage in a way that maximizes their energy intake per unit of time, while minimizing the risk of being eaten or injured. Imagine a bird A starling foraging for leather jacket larvae in a field to feed its young. It faces a complex mathematical problem. If it stays close to the nest, it saves travel time, but the food there might be depleted. If it flies further away, the food might be better, but the travel takes time and energy. Furthermore, how many larvae should it carry in its beak at once? If it carries too many, they might drop. If it carries too few, the trip is wasted. Optimal foraging theory predicts the exact load size the bird should carry based on the distance from the nest. When we measure the real birds in the field, they match the mathematical prediction almost perfectly. They are intuitive economists, balancing the books with every flight. We also see this logic in diet choice. A predator might choose between a large nut that is hard to crack and a small berry that is easy to eat. The nut has high energy, benefit, but takes a long time to open, cost. The berry has low energy, but is instant. The animal subconsciously calculates the profitability energy divided by handling time. If the profitability of the nut drops because its shell is too hard, the animal switches to berries. This is not random, it is an algorithm for survival. Another major area of study is mating systems. Why are some animals monogamous and others polygamous? This is rarely about romance. It is about resources and offspring care. Monogamy, where one male pairs with one female, is actually rare in mammals but common in birds. This usually happens when the offspring are so helpless that both parents are needed to keep them alive. If the male leaves, the chicks die, and his fitness drops to zero. Therefore, it is in his selfish evolutionary interest to stay. Polygyny, where one male mates with many females, occurs when resources are clumped. If a male can control a prime territory with lots of food, females will flock to him. He defends the resource, and by extension, the females. Polyandry, where one female mates with many males, is rarer but fascinating. It occurs in species like the jacana bird, where the female is larger and more aggressive, defending a territory while multiple males incubate her eggs. This flips the traditional script, showing that behavior is driven by ecological necessity, not rigid gender roles. Let us deepen our inquiry by looking at one of the most puzzling behaviors in nature: altruism. Why would an individual sacrifice itself for another? Consider the Belding's ground squirrel. When a predator approaches, a squirrel will stand on its hind legs and give a high-pitched alarm call. This call warns the colony to hide, but it also reveals the caller's location to the predator. The caller is more likely to be eaten. In a survival of the fittest world, shouldn't this gene for self-sacrifice be weeded out immediately? The answer lies in a concept called inclusive fitness, famously mathematically described by the biologist W.D. Hamilton in the 1960 seconds. Hamilton realized that you are not the only vessel for your genes. Your siblings share 50% of your DNA. Your cousins share 12.5%. If your sacrifice saves 3 siblings, you have mathematically saved 150% of your own genetic copy. You have actually increased your genetic success by dying, provided you saved enough relatives. This is known as kin selection. It explains why bees sting to defend the hive. They are sterile workers, defending their mother, the queen, who carries the genetic future of the colony. They are not acting out of charity, they are acting out of genetic imperative. We also must consider territoriality. Fighting is expensive, it risks injury and death. Therefore, animals only defend territories when the benefit outweighs the cost. If resources are superabundant like a massive swarm of insects, there is no point in fighting. There is enough for everyone. If resources are unpredictable and scattered, you cannot defend them. You only see territorial behavior when a resource is both valuable and defensible, like a specific nesting hole or a concentrated patch of flowers. Why does studying the behavior of squirrels and starlings matter to humans? Because we are animals too. The principles of behavioral ecology apply to us. The field of economics is deeply rooted in these biological principles. Game theory, which is used to analyze market competition and international politics, was developed in tandem with behavioral ecology. The hawk-dove game, a model that predicts when to fight and when to retreat, is used by stock traders and military strategists alike. Furthermore, understanding these behaviors is critical for conservation. If we want to save an endangered species, we cannot just give it space. We must understand its choices. If we create a wildlife corridor, but it is too narrow and exposes the animals to edge effects where they feel unsafe, they will not use it. They will perceive the cost as too high. If we try to breed animals in captivity, but we don't understand their mating system, forcing a monogamous pairing on a polygynous species, they will fail to reproduce. We must think like the animal to save it. We also see the relevance in human psychology. Many of our own subconscious behaviors, our preferences for high-calorie foods, our tribal loyalty to groups, kin selection, our risk-averse decision-making are evolutionary leftovers from when we were foragers on the savannah. We are optimal foragers navigating a modern supermarket, driven by ancient instincts. You have now stepped into the mind of the animal. You see the bird not as a mindless automaton, but as a decision-maker constantly weighing risks and rewards. You understand that every song, every fight, and every flight is an equation being solved in real time. But an individual does not make these choices in isolation. As we have seen, they are surrounded by others. One bird is a decision-maker, but 1,000 birds, that is a phenomenon. 1,000 birds is a population. When we step back and blur the eyes, the individuals merge into a single, shifting mass. We must now leave the individual behind and look at the group. How do we count them? How do they spread across the landscape? Why are they here and not there? Our next lesson deals with the mathematics of the crowd. Lesson 6. Population Distribution and Abundance. We have spent the last few hours understanding the individual animal, its physiology, its behavior, its evolution. Now, we step back. We blur our eyes until the individuals merge into dots on a map. We are no longer studying the wolf. We are studying the pack. We are studying the herd, the swarm, and the colony. In this lesson, we will learn how populations are spaced across the landscape, how we count them, and what invisible walls limit their numbers. Breathe deeply, and imagine you're a satellite drifting silently over the planet, watching the patterns of life below. A population is defined as a group of individuals of the same species, living in a defined area. But living is too simple a word. They are occupying space in a very specific way. When ecologists look at a population, the first question they ask is, what is the pattern? There are generally 3 types of dispersion patterns that nature creates. The first is random dispersion. This is the rarest pattern. Imagine a field of dandelions. Their seeds are carried by the wind and land wherever the breeze drops them. If the soil is rich everywhere, and there is no competition, the flowers will grow in a chaotic, unpredictable scatter. There is no pattern because there is no pressure forcing them into a pattern. It implies that resources are abundant and consistent, and that the individuals don't really care about each other. They neither help nor fight one another. The second pattern is uniform dispersion. This looks like a plantation or an orchard where every individual is equally spaced from its neighbor. But in nature, this orderliness is born of conflict. Picture a colony of nesting seabirds' gannets on a cliff edge. They sit exactly 1 peck distance apart. If a neighbor gets too close, they attack. This aggressive territoriality forces the population into a strict grid. Plants do this too. The creosote bush in the desert releases toxins into the soil around its roots to kill any other plant that tries to grow too close. This creates a landscape of perfectly spaced bushes, each demanding its personal bubble of water. The third and most common pattern is clumped dispersion. Life clusters. You see this in a herd of bison, a school of fish, or a grove of aspen trees. Clumping happens for 2 reasons. First, resources are usually clumped. Water is not everywhere. It is in the watering hole. Safety is not everywhere. It is in the thicket. Therefore, animals gather where the resources are. Second, there is safety in numbers. A single sardine is easy prey. A school of 1,000,000 sardines is a confusing, shifting wall of silver that confuses predators. Once we identify the pattern, we must determine the number. How many are there? This is the study of abundance. Counting animals is incredibly difficult. You cannot simply ask the fish in a lake to line up. Instead, ecologists use statistical methods to estimate. The most famous of these is the mark and recapture method. Imagine you want to know how many turtles are in a pond. You catch 50 turtles, paint a small white dot on their shell, and release them. A week later, you return. You catch another 50 turtles. If only 5 of them have the white dot, you know that your marked turtles have diluted into a much larger population. If 45 of them have the dot, you know the population is small because you kept catching the same ones. By using a simple mathematical ratio, you can calculate the total number of turtles hidden in the muddy water without ever seeing them all. We also define the geographic range. This is the total area a species occupies. Some ranges are tiny. The Devil's Hole pupfish lives in a single limestone cavern in Nevada. Its entire universe is the size of a living room. Other ranges are massive. The peregrine falcon is found on every continent except Antarctica. What limits these ranges? Why doesn't the pupfish leave the cave? Why doesn't the falcon live in the Antarctic? The limits are usually a combination of physical barriers, like a mountain range or an ocean, and biological barriers. Perhaps the falcon cannot handle the extreme cold, a physiological limit. Or perhaps if it tries to nest there, a larger predator eats its eggs, a biotic limit. The edge of a species range is a visible line where the cost of survival becomes too high. Why do we need to know where populations are and how they are arranged? This knowledge is the bedrock of conservation. Consider the protection of the snow leopard. These cats are elusive, living in the high Himalayas. If we assumed they were randomly distributed, we might just protect a random square of land and hope for the best. But we know they have a specific distribution. They follow the herds of blue sheep, which in turn follow the alpine grass. Their distribution is clumped. Therefore, our conservation efforts must be clumped too. We must protect the specific valleys where the prey lives, not just random mountains. Furthermore, understanding dispersion helps us manage pests. If we know that a certain beetle infestation spreads in a clumped pattern, we don't need to spray the entire forest with pesticides. We can target the specific clumps, saving money and sparing the rest of the ecosystem from chemical exposure. We also use this to understand human impacts. When we build a highway through a forest, we are essentially creating a physical barrier that slices a population in half. We are fragmenting the range. If the animals cannot cross the road to find mates, the population splits into 2 smaller, more vulnerable populations. This is called habitat fragmentation, and it is one of the leading causes of extinction today. Knowing how animals move and space themselves allows us to design wildlife corridors, bridges, and tunnels that reconnect these fragmented ranges. You now have the map. You can see the random scatter of the dandelions, the uniform grid of the seabirds, and the protective clumps of the bison herd. You understand that these patterns are not accidents. They are strategies for survival written in space. But a map is a static thing. It is a snapshot in time. It tells us where the animals are today. It does not tell us where they will be tomorrow, or if there will be more or fewer of them next year. Populations are not statues. They are swelling and shrinking waves. They are dynamic. To understand the future of these groups, we must add the element of time. We must look at birth rates and death rates. We must understand the mathematics of explosion and collapse. Our next lesson takes us into the calculus of life. Lesson 7. Population growth and regulation. We will now look at the engine of abundance. We will ask, how does a handful of rabbits become a plague? Why do locusts suddenly swarm and then vanish? Why doesn't the world fill up with elephants? We are entering the realm of ecological mathematics. We will look at the laws that govern the explosion of life and the harsh realities that rein it back in. Clear your mind and visualize a graph, a simple line moving across a page that tells the story of survival. To understand growth, we must start with the ideal. Imagine a world with no limits. There is infinite food, infinite space, and no predators. In this paradise, a population will grow according to the exponential growth model. Picture a single bacterium in a jar. Every 20 minutes, it divides. 1 becomes 2. 20 minutes later, 2 become 4, then 8, then 16. At first, the growth seems slow, but soon the numbers become staggering. This is the power of the exponent. If you graph this, the line starts flat and then curves sharply upward, shooting towards the sky. We call this the J-shaped curve. We mathematically describe this rate of increase as R, the intrinsic rate of increase. Small animals like mosquitoes have a very high R. They can multiply 1,000-fold in a week. Large animals like whales have a low R. It takes them years to add a single individual to the population. But regardless of the speed, if resources are unlimited, the shape of the curve is always that rising J. But we do not live in a paradise of infinite resources. We live on a finite planet. The jar eventually runs out of food, the space runs out. This introduces the second, more realistic model, logistic growth. In the logistic model, the population starts by growing exponentially. The line shoots up, but as the numbers rise, resources become scarce. Competition begins. The growth rate slows down. The line starts to flatten. Eventually, the population size stabilizes at a specific number. This ceiling is called the carrying capacity, denoted by the letter K. The carrying capacity is the maximum number of individuals that the environment can support indefinitely. It is the limit of the land. If the population is below K, it grows. If it is above K, individuals starve and the population shrinks. The graph for this model looks like an S, rising quickly and then leveling off. This is the shaped curve. It represents the balance between the biological drive to reproduce and the environmental reality of scarcity. Let us explore what actually stops the growth. What are the brakes on the car? We categorize these brakes into two types. First, there are density-dependent factors. These are problems that get worse as the crowd gets bigger. Think of disease. If 1,000 mice are packed into a small burrow, a virus spreads like wildfire. If those same mice are spread over 10 miles, the virus fades out. Competition is another density-dependent factor. The more deer there are in a forest, the less grass there is for each deer. These factors act like a thermostat. When the population gets too high, they kick in to cool it down. They push the population back toward the carrying capacity. Second, there are density-independent factors. These are the disasters that don't care how many of you there are. A forest fire kills the trees regardless of whether the forest is crowded or sparse. A hurricane, a drought, or a volcanic eruption, these are random reapers. They can crash a population at any time, resetting the clock. Consider the complexity of the alley effect. Usually, we assume that more individuals means a stronger population, but sometimes, if a population gets too small, the growth rate drops. If there are only 3 tigers left in a massive jungle, they might never find each other to mate. The population spirals downward simply because it is too lonely. This is a critical concept in conservation. Once a species drops below a certain threshold, it may be doomed, even if we protect the habitat, simply because the social structure has collapsed. We also see fascinating oscillations, cycles of boom and bust. Some populations never find a steady carrying capacity. They overshoot it. They eat all the food, reproduce wildly, and then starve en masse. Then, the vegetation recovers, and the cycle begins again. This is nature seeking equilibrium, but constantly missing the mark. Why does this abstract math matter? Because we are living inside the graph. The human population is currently following a trajectory that looks suspiciously like that J-shaped exponential curve. For thousands of years, our numbers were low and flat. Then, with the Industrial Revolution and modern medicine, we shot upward. We essentially removed the density-dependent factors, we cured diseases, and artificially increased our food supply with fertilizer. The great question of our time is, where is K? What is the carrying capacity of Earth for humans? Have we already passed it? Are we currently in the overshoot phase, waiting for the crash? Or can technology raise the ceiling forever? Every time you hear about sustainable development, you are hearing an attempt to apply the logistic growth model to human civilization. We are trying to voluntarily flatten our own curve before nature flattens it for us. Furthermore, we use these models to manage wildlife. When a state issues hunting permits for deer, they are doing calculus. They have estimated that the deer population is approaching K, where the deer will start to starve or destroy the forest. The hunters act as a density-dependent factor. artificially lowering the number to keep the herd healthy and the ecosystem in balance. Conversely, when we try to save the rhino, we are trying to push the population away from the danger zone of the alley effect. You now understand the laws of numbers. You see the J curve of potential and the S curve of reality. You understand that every population is trapped between the urge to expand and the limits of the earth. But growth requires energy. It takes resources to build a body. It takes time to raise a child. Every organism has a finite amount of energy to spend. How should they spend it? Should they have 100 babies and hope one survives? Or should they have one baby and guard it with their life? Nature has devised different investment plans for survival. We call these life history strategies. In our next lesson, we will look at the different ways species gamble with their future. Lesson 8. Life history strategies. Every living thing on this planet faces a fundamental problem. It is the problem of scarcity. Not just a scarcity of food, but a scarcity of energy and time. An organism cannot do everything. It cannot live forever, grow to an infinite size, and produce 1 billion offspring. It has a limited budget. It has a finite amount of energy to spend between the moment it is born and the moment it dies. In this lesson, we will look at how different species choose to spend that budget. We will see that nature has devised different investment plans for existence. Some spend it all at once in a glorious burst of reproduction. Others invest slowly, saving for the future, nurturing their young with protective care. These are the life history strategies, the diverse blueprints for navigating the trade-offs of life. Breathe slowly and imagine the difference between a sudden explosion of wildflowers and the slow, majestic march of an elephant herd. The central concept here is the trade-off. In biology, the principle of allocation states that if an organism uses energy for one function, such as growth, the amount of energy available for other functions, such as reproduction, is reduced. You cannot spend the same dollar twice. Ecologists generally classify species along a continuum based on how they solve this problem. At one end of the spectrum, we have the R-selected species. The R stands for the growth rate we discussed in the last lesson. These are the opportunists. They are the gamblers of the natural world. Think of a dandelion, a mouse, or a bacterium. The strategy of the R-selected organism is simple: live fast, die young, and leave as many offspring as possible. They prioritize quantity over quality. They are usually small in body size and mature very quickly. They do not invest energy in parental care. A mother oyster releases millions of eggs into the ocean and then leaves them to their fate. She does not guard them. She does not feed them. She relies on the sheer statistical probability that out of those millions, 1 or 2 will survive. This is a strategy built on speed and high numbers. It is designed to exploit unpredictable environments where life is uncertain. At the other end of the spectrum, we have the K-selected species. The K stands for carrying capacity. These are the competitors. They are the investors. Think of a whale, a gorilla, an oak tree, or a human. The strategy of the K-selected organism is the opposite. Live slow, live long, and invest heavily in a few high-quality offspring. They prioritize quality over quantity. They are usually large in body size and take a long time to reach maturity. Crucially, they invest massive amounts of energy in parental care. A mother gorilla will carry her infant for months, nurse it for years, and protect it with her life. She produces very few babies, but because of her investment, almost all of them survive to adulthood. This strategy is built on efficiency and stability. It is designed for crowded, competitive environments where resources are tight and only the strongest, best prepared individuals can win a spot. Let us deepen our understanding by connecting these strategies to the environment. Why would an animal choose to be an R strategist? Usually because the environment is unstable. If you live in a puddle that dries up every week, there is no point in being a whale. You need to be a mosquito. You need to grow up in 3 days, reproduce, and get out before the disaster strikes. R selection is a response to volatility. Conversely, K selection is a response to stability. If you live in an ancient rainforest that hasn't changed in 10,000 years, the forest is full. The carrying capacity is reached. To survive here, You don't need to be fast, you need to be good. You need to outcompete your neighbor for that one beam of sunlight. This requires a large body, a complex brain, and a long learning period. To visualize how these lives play out, ecologists use survivorship curves. Imagine a graph that tracks the fate of 1,000 individuals born at the same time. Type I survivorship is the curve of the K-selected species, like humans. The line stays high and flat for a long time. Most individuals survive childhood, survive their teenage years, and survive adulthood. They only start to die off in large numbers when they reach old age. This is the privilege of parental care. Type 3 survivorship is the curve of the R-selected species, like the oyster or the acorn. The line drops precipitously the moment life begins. Out of 1,000 seeds, 900 might be eaten or rot within the first week. The curve plummets near the start. However, the line flattens out for the few survivors. If an acorn manages to become a sapling, it can live for hundreds of years. The danger is at the very beginning. There is also a type 2 survivorship, which sits in the middle. This is a straight diagonal line downward. It represents species where the chance of dying is constant throughout life. A songbird or a squirrel is just as likely to be eaten when it is a baby as when it is an adult. The risk never changes. It is important to remember that R and K are not two separate boxes. They are the ends of a sliding scale. A sea turtle is a confusing mix. It is large and long-lived, K treats, but it lays hundreds of eggs and abandons them, treats. Nature is flexible, and many species occupy the grey area in the middle of the continuum. Why does understanding life history strategies matter? It is absolutely critical for conservation and resource management. When we try to save an endangered species, we must know its strategy. K-selected species like the rhinoceros, the condor, or the blue whale are terrifyingly easy to drive to extinction. Because they reproduce so slowly, their populations cannot bounce back quickly from a crash. If you kill too many elephants, it might take a century for the herd to recover. They are fragile in the face of rapid change. On the other hand, R-selected species are incredibly resilient. This is why it is so hard to get rid of pests. You can kill 99% of the cockroaches in a building, but because they reproduce so fast and in such high numbers, the population can explode back to full size in a month. They are built to recover from disaster. This also explains the problem of invasive species. Most successful invasive species are R strategists. Weeds, rats, rabbits, cane toads. They invade a new territory and overwhelm the native species with sheer numbers before the natives can react. They win by flooding the market. Finally, looking at this spectrum helps us understand ourselves. Humans are the ultimate K strategists. We have one of the longest childhoods in the animal kingdom. We invest more energy in each offspring, feeding them, clothing them, educating them than any other creature. This high investment has allowed us to dominate the planet, but it also makes each human life uniquely precious and biologically expensive. You now understand the gamble. You see the dandelion casting its seeds to the wind, hoping for a single success. You see the whale guiding its calf through the dark ocean, investing everything in a single future. You understand that these are two different answers to the same question. How do I persist? But whether you are an R strategist or a K strategist, you are never alone. You are always surrounded by others who want what you want. The world is not just a stage for reproduction, it is an arena of conflict. When two species want the same food, the same space, or the same light, a silent war begins. We must now look at what happens when lives collide. We enter the realm of direct struggle. Our next lesson explores the battle for resources. Lesson 9. Interspecific Competition. We have spoken about the individual and the population. Now, we look at what happens when two different species meet. In a world of limited resources, neighbors are not friends, they are rivals. Every seed eaten by a squirrel is a seed that a bird cannot eat. Every drop of water drunk by an oak tree is a drop stolen from the pine standing next to it. In this lesson, we will explore the silent war for resources that shapes the natural world. We will learn why species fight, how they avoid each other, and how this conflict actually creates the beautiful diversity of life we see today. relax, and open your mind to the concept of the ecological duel. Competition arises whenever two species require the same limited resource to survive. We generally categorize this struggle into two distinct types. The first is interference competition. This is direct, face-to-face conflict. It is aggressive. Imagine a lion chasing a hyena away from a kill. The lion is physically preventing the hyena from eating. It is not just about who eats faster. It is about intimidation and violence. We see this in the plant world too. The black walnut tree releases a toxic chemical called juglone from its roots. This chemical poisons the soil around it, preventing other plants from growing. It is chemical warfare designed to secure a monopoly on soil nutrients. The second type is exploitation competition. This is indirect. There is no fighting, only a race. Imagine two different species of birds that eat the same type of insect. They never interact. They never touch. But every time bird A eats an insect, it reduces the supply for bird B. If bird A is faster and more efficient, it will eat all the insects before bird B can get to them. Bird B starves not because it was attacked, but because it was out-hustled. This is the quiet starvation of the loser in an efficiency contest. This leads us to the most famous rule in this field, the competitive exclusion principle, often called Gauss's law. It states, quite simply, that complete competitors cannot coexist. If two species have the exact same ecological niche, if they eat the exact same food, live in the exact same place, and hunt at the exact same time, one of them will inevitably win, and the other will inevitably go extinct locally. Mathematics dictates that they cannot share the exact same space forever. One will be slightly more efficient, and over time, that slight edge will compound until the other is wiped out. So, if Gauss's law is true, why is the world not empty? Why do we see so many different species living together in the same forest? The answer lies in how nature solves the problem of conflict. Life avoids extinction through a process called resource partitioning. If you cannot beat your rival, you do not die, you change. You find a way to divide the resource. A classic example, discovered by the ecologist Robert MacArthur, involves warblers, small songbirds living in spruce trees. Several species of warblers lived in the same trees and ate the same insects. According to the competitive exclusion principle, they should have fought until only one species remained. But MacArthur discovered that they had partitioned the tree. One species hunted only in the high, sunny canopy. Another hunted only on the outer branches of the middle section. A third hunted only on the dark, inner trunk. By dividing the tree into distinct zones, they avoided direct competition. They turned one niche into three smaller niches, allowing them all to survive. This pressure to avoid competition is so powerful, it can physically reshape an animal. This is called character displacement. Imagine two species of finch living on different islands. When they live apart, they both have medium-sized beaks because that is the best size for the available seeds. But if a storm blows them onto the same island, they are suddenly competitors. Over thousands of years, evolution will force them apart. The finches with slightly larger beaks will focus on big seeds. The finches with slightly smaller beaks will focus on tiny seeds. Eventually, the two populations will look physically different, one with a massive beak, one with a delicate beak. The competition has literally carved their faces to ensure they no longer fight. This distinction brings us to the concepts of the fundamental niche versus the realized niche. The fundamental niche is the dream life where an organism could live if there were no competitors. The realized niche is the actual life where it actually lives because competitors have pushed it into a corner. Barnacles on a rock often live in the high tide zone, not because they like being dry, but because a stronger, faster species of barnacle has kicked them out of the comfortable low tide zone. They survive by tolerating the harsh conditions that the bully cannot handle. Why does this matter to the human world? Because these principles govern our own economies and societies. In the business world, the competitive exclusion principle is a reality. If two companies offer the exact same product at the exact same price in the exact same location, one will eventually fail. To survive, businesses engage in resource partitioning. They differentiate. One becomes the luxury brand. the high canopy, and the other becomes the budget brand, the lower branches. They split the market to avoid mutual destruction. Marketing is essentially the attempt to define a unique, realized niche. We also see the devastating lack of competition when we look at invasive species. When a python is released in the Florida Everglades, it has no natural competitors. It is an interference competitor that no one knows how to fight. It ignores the local rules of resource partitioning and simply consumes everything. The ecosystem collapses because the delicate truce between the native species is shattered by an aggressor that doesn't play by the evolutionary rules. Furthermore, this lesson teaches us that biodiversity is born of struggle. The reason there are so many millions of species is that life is constantly trying to escape competition. Every unique beak, every strange diet, every odd habitat choice is an evolutionary solution to the problem of Gauss's law. We are surrounded by variety because variety is the only alternative to extinction. You now understand the silent tension of the community. You see the warblers carefully staying in their own parts of the tree. You see the plants poisoning the soil to keep neighbors away. You understand that peace in nature is actually a stalemate, a carefully negotiated treaty where everyone agrees to stick to their own niche. But competition is a contest between equals. It is a struggle between two who want the same thing. There is another type of interaction that is far more unbalanced. It is the interaction between the eater and the eaten. It is the swift violence of the hunt and the slow drain of the parasite. We must now leave the world of rivalry and enter the world of consumption. Our next lesson explores the transfer of flesh and energy. Lesson 10. Predation, Herbivory, and Parasitism. This lesson is titled Predation, Herbivory, and Parasitism. We are now looking at the most fundamental transaction in the biosphere, the transfer of energy from one living thing to another. It is a world of eaters and the eaten. It is a world of sharp teeth, silent wings, and invisible invaders. But do not view this as cruel. View it as necessary. It is the mechanism that drives the flow of life. Relax, and let us explore the hunters and the hunted. Ecologists classify these interactions as positive-negative relationships, often written as plus. One organism benefits, the consumer, while the other suffers a cost, the consumed. Let's start with predation. This is the act of one animal killing and eating another. It is immediate and lethal. We tend to think of the lion and the gazelle, but predation happens at every scale. A ladybug eating an aphid is a predator. A blue whale filtering krill is a predator. This relationship drives one of the most powerful forces in evolution, the evolutionary arms race. Imagine a slow antelope. It is eaten by a cheetah. The only antelopes that survive are the fast ones. So, the antelope population gets faster. Now, the slow cheetahs starve. Only the fastest cheetahs survive. So, the cheetah population gets faster. They are locked in a cycle of adaptation, each pushing the other to become more extreme. This arms race produces two main types of defense. First is cryptic coloration, or camouflage. This is the art of disappearing. Think of a stick insect that looks exactly like a twig, or a flounderfish that mimics the sandy ocean floor. If the predator cannot see you, it cannot eat you. Second is aposematism, or warning coloration. This is the opposite of hiding. It is the art of shouting. Think of the poison dart frog, glowing with neon blue or yellow skin. This color is a signal. It tells the predator, I am dangerous. Do not touch me. Over time, predators learn to associate bright colors with sickness or bad taste. This defense is so effective that some harmless species, like the king snake, have evolved to mimic the colors of the deadly coral snake. This is called Battian mimicry, a harmless sheep in a wolf's clothing. Now, let us turn to herbivory. This is the consumption of plant material by animals. It is easy to think of plants as passive victims, just standing there waiting to be eaten. But plants are fighters. Because they cannot run away, they must fight with chemistry and armor. Physical defenses are obvious. The thorns of a rose, the spines of a cactus, or the microscopic silica crystals in grass that wear down the teeth of grazers. But the chemical defenses are even more sophisticated. Plants produce secondary compounds, chemicals not needed for growth, but designed solely to sicken herbivores. The caffeine in coffee, the nicotine in tobacco, and the tannins in oak leaves are all natural pesticides. They are chemical warfare. When you enjoy the spicy burn of a chili pepper, you are actually tasting the plant's attempt to hurt you. Finally, we consider parasitism. This is a special kind of predation. In true predation, the predator is larger than the prey and kills it quickly. In parasitism, the predator, the parasite, is much smaller than the prey, the host, and rarely kills it immediately. A good parasite wants its host to stay alive as long as possible, to provide a steady supply of blood or nutrients. Parasites are masters of manipulation. Consider the cordyceps fungus. It infects an ant, grows into its brain, and chemically forces the ant to climb to the top of a tall blade of grass. The ant clamps its jaws shut and dies. This high vantage point allows the fungus to burst out of the ant's head and spread its spores over the widest possible area. The parasite does not just eat the body, it commandeers the behavior. We also see brood parasitism, famously practiced by the cuckoo bird. The cuckoo lays its egg in the nest of a smaller bird, like a warbler. When the cuckoo chick hatches, it pushes the warbler's own eggs out of the nest. The warbler parents, driven by instinct, feed the giant, demanding imposter as if it were their own. It is a theft of parental care. Why is this important to understand? Because predators and parasites are the invisible regulators of the world. Without them, ecosystems collapse. A classic example of this top-down control is the relationship between the lynx and the snowshoe hare in the Canadian boreal forest. Ecologists have tracked their numbers for over a century using fur trapping records. The data reveals a perfect, synchronized cycle. Every 10 years, the hare population explodes. The lynx population, seeing an abundance of food, explodes shortly after. But then, the lynx eat too many hares. The hare population crashes. The lynx, now starving, crash as well. This allows the vegetation to recover, the few remaining hares to breed, and the cycle to begin again. It is a heartbeat of the forest, driven entirely by predation. This knowledge is the foundation of biological control in agriculture. Instead of spraying toxic pesticides to kill aphids on crops, farmers can release ladybugs or parasitic wasps. We use the natural enemies of the pest to do the work for us. We are harnessing the arms race for our own benefit. However, this is dangerous if misunderstood. In the past, humans have introduced predators like the cane toad or the mongoose to new islands to control rats, only to have the predators eat the native birds instead. When we meddle with the food web without understanding the specific relationships, we often create a new disaster. You now see the web of consumption. You see the camouflage of the moth, the warning colors of the frog, and the silent chemical war of the plant. You understand that every organism is constantly looking over its shoulder or looking for its next meal. But up until now, we have looked at these interactions in isolation, one predator and one prey. In reality, nature is not a series of duels. It is a chaotic, crowded battlefield. Foxes eat rabbits, but they also eat berries. Hawks eat the rabbits, but they also eat the foxes. We must now widen our lens. We must stop looking at pairs and start looking at the whole. How do all these hundreds of species fit together into a single, functioning unit? Our next lesson explores the architecture of the crowd. Lesson 11: Community Structure and Dynamics. This lesson is titled Community Structure and Dynamics. We have spent the last few lessons looking at individual relationships, predator and prey, competitor and rival. Now, we zoom out to see the entire picture. We look at the community as a whole. We ask, how is this biological city organized? Who runs it? What happens if you remove a single brick from the wall? Relax and prepare to see the invisible architecture that holds nature together. A community is defined as an association of interacting populations of different species living in the same area at the same time. But a list of names is not enough. To understand a community, we must measure its biodiversity. Biodiversity is often misunderstood as simply the number of species, but in ecology, it has two distinct components. The first is species richness. This is the simple count. If a forest has 50 types of trees, its richness is 50. But richness can be misleading. Imagine a forest with 100 trees. If 99 of them are oaks and only one is a pine, is that truly diverse? This brings us to the second component, relative abundance, sometimes called species evenness. This measures how equal the numbers are. A forest with 50 oaks and 50 pines is more diverse than the forest with 99 oaks and 1 pine, even though the richness is the same. A healthy community typically has high evenness. It means the resources are being shared, and no single species has achieved a monopoly. Within this community, not all players are equal. Some species have a disproportionately large impact. These are called keystone species. The term comes from architecture. The keystone is the center stone in an arch. If you remove it, the entire arch collapses, even though the stone itself is small. A classic example is the sea otter. In the kelp forests of the Pacific, sea otters eat sea urchins. Sea urchins eat kelp. When the otters are present, they keep the urchin population low, allowing the kelp to grow into massive underwater forests that support thousands of fish. But if you remove the otters, the urchins explode in number. They graze the kelp down to the bedrock, creating an urchin barren. The fish disappear. The seals disappear. The entire community collapses because the keystone was removed. The otter is the architect of the ecosystem. To map these complex interactions, ecologists use food webs. A food chain is simple. Grass is eaten by a deer, which is eaten by a wolf. But nature is rarely a straight line. It is a web. In a food web, we organize organisms by their trophic levels. At the bottom are the primary producers, the plants and algae that capture the sun's energy. Above them are the primary consumers, the herbivores. Next are the secondary consumers, the carnivores that eat herbivores. Finally, at the top are the apex predators and the decomposers who recycle the dead. We also look at the direction of control. Does the community work from the bottom up or the top down? In a bottom-up model, the community is controlled by nutrients. If you add more nitrogen to the soil, more grass grows. If there is more grass, there are more rabbits. If there are more rabbits, there are more foxes. The energy pushes upward from the base. In a top-down model, the community is controlled by predation. This is often called a trophic cascade. Let's return to the wolves of Yellowstone National Park. When wolves were reintroduced in 1995, it triggered a cascade. The wolves killed elk, but more importantly, they changed the elk's behavior. The elk stopped grazing in the open valleys where they were vulnerable. This allowed the willow and aspen trees in the valleys to regrow. The regrown trees provided wood for beavers, whose populations returned. The beaver dams created ponds for fish and amphibians. The return of a single top predator rippled down the web, physically changing the flow of the rivers and the composition of the forest. This is the power of top-down control. We also distinguish between foundation species and keystone species. A keystone species has a big impact, despite being rare, like the wolf. A foundation species has a big impact because it is huge and abundant. The coral in a reef or the trees in a forest are foundation species. They literally build the physical structure of the environment that everyone else lives in. They are the landlords of the community. Why is community ecology critical for us? Because we are currently dismantling these communities without understanding the consequences. When we overfish the oceans, we are often removing the apex predators, the sharks and the tuna. This triggers a trophic cascade. Without the predators, the smaller fish explode in number, eat all the zooplankton, and the algae blooms out of control, turning the water green and toxic. We break the top-down control and ruin the water quality. Understanding keystone species is the most efficient strategy for conservation. We cannot save every single species. We don't have the money or the time, but if we identify and protect the keystone species, we get the most bang for our buck. By saving the sea otter, we save the urchins, the kelp, the fish, and the crabs, all for the price of one animal. It is a strategic lever. This also applies to human health. Your gut is a community. It is an ecosystem of bacteria. If you take a strong antibiotic, you are like a forest fire. You kill the good bacteria along with the bad. This opens up space for invasive species like C. difficile to take over and make you sick. Doctors are now using fecal transplants, essentially reintroducing a healthy community to cure these diseases. They are practicing community ecology inside the human body. You now see the structure. You see the trophic levels stacked like a pyramid. You see the keystone holding the arch together. You understand that a community is a web of connections, where pulling on one string shakes the entire net. But this structure is not permanent. If you walk away from a farm field, it does not stay a field forever. Weeds grow, then shrubs, then pine trees, then oaks. The community changes its identity over time. It grows up. We must now add the fourth dimension, time. We will watch the slow, orderly march of nature as it reclaims the land. We will watch a bare rock become a forest. Our next lesson explores the process of recovery and change. Lesson 12. Ecological Succession. This lesson is titled Ecological Succession. We are going to watch a movie of the Earth played in fast forward. We will see a bare, lifeless rock transform into a lush, ancient forest. We will see how nature heals its wounds and rebuilds itself after disaster. This is the story of resilience. It is the story of how life claims the empty spaces. Clear your mind and imagine a volcanic island rising from the sea, black, steaming, and empty. This is where we begin. Ecological succession is the orderly, predictable process of change in the species structure of a community over time. It is not random, it follows a script. We generally divide this script into two main types. The first type is primary succession. This is the hard road. It occurs on surfaces where no soil exists, on bare rock, cooled lava, or sand dunes. Life must start from zero. The first organisms to arrive are called pioneer species. These are the toughest of the tough. Lichens are the classic example. A lichen is a partnership between a fungus and an algae. It doesn't need soil, it clings to the bare stone. It secretes acids that slowly, chemically, break down the rock. This is a slow, quiet violence. The rock cracks, dust forms. When the lichen dies, its tiny body decomposes into organic matter. Slowly, over decades, a thin film of soil is created. This allows the next wave to arrive, the mosses. They hold moisture and trap dust, building the soil deeper. Then come the ferns, then the grasses. Each generation prepares the way for the next, sacrificing itself to build the foundation for the future. The second type is secondary succession. This happens when a disturbance destroys an existing community but leaves the soil intact. Think of a forest fire, a hurricane, or a farmer abandoning a plowed field. The slate is wiped clean, but the foundation remains. Because the soil is already there, often full of seeds and roots, this process is much faster. Both types of succession move toward a theoretical endpoint called the climax community. This is a stable, mature community that is in equilibrium with the climate. In the temperate zone, this might be a forest of giant oak and hickory trees. In the tropics, it is the rainforest. The climax community is the final destination where the rate of change slows down and the giants take over. Let us look closer at the mechanism of this change. Why does one species replace another? It is often because the early species alter the environment in a way that makes it worse for themselves but better for their successors. This is called facilitation. Consider the alder tree. It is often an early arrival in succession. The alder has a special ability. It works with bacteria in its roots to fix nitrogen from the air, enriching the soil. It is a fertilizer factory. But as the alder grows, it creates deep shade. The alder seedlings need bright light to grow, so they cannot survive in the shadow of their parents. However, the spruce tree loves nitrogen and tolerates shade. So, the spruce seedlings grow happily under the alders. Eventually, the spruce trees grow taller, shading out the alders and killing them. The alder prepared the soil for its own replacement. It is a biological tragedy. Success leads to obsolescence. We must also refine our understanding of the climax community. Early ecologists thought the climax was a permanent, perfect state. Once a forest became a climax forest, it would stay that way forever. We now know this is not true. Nature is dynamic. This brings us to the intermediate disturbance hypothesis. This theory suggests that a little bit of chaos is actually good. If a forest is never disturbed, a few dominant species will take over and exclude everyone else, lowering biodiversity. If a forest is constantly disturbed, nothing can get established, also lowering biodiversity. But with intermediate disturbance and occasional storm, a small fire every 50 years, you get the best of both worlds. You have patches of open grass, patches of young shrubs, and patches of old trees all mixed together. This mosaic supports the highest number of species. The climax is not a static painting, it is a shifting kaleidoscope. Why is this knowledge vital for us? Because we are the masters of disturbance. Every time we plough a field, pave a road, or cut down a forest, we are resetting the succession clock. This concept teaches us humility in our management of nature. For decades, the US Forest Service had a policy of total fire suppression. They put out every single fire immediately. They thought they were protecting the climax community, but by stopping the natural cycle of disturbance, they allowed dead wood to pile up. They stopped the succession of fire-dependent species like the sequoia, whose seeds only open in the heat of a flame. When fires finally did happen, they weren't small, healthy disturbances. They were megafires that destroyed everything, including the soil. We learned that we cannot freeze time. We must manage with the cycle of succession, using tools like prescribed burns to mimic the natural rhythms we interrupted. Furthermore, restoration ecology, the science of repairing damaged ecosystems, is essentially applied succession. When we try to restore a strip mine, we don't just plant oak trees immediately. They would die. We have to think like nature. We plant the pioneer species first, the grasses and legumes to fix the soil. We have to follow the script. We have to be patient enough to let the moss do its work before we invite the trees. We also see this in our own bodies. The microbiome in your gut undergoes succession. When you are born, you are sterile. The first bacteria to arrive are the pioneers. As you drink milk and then eat solid food, the community changes, one wave replacing another, until you establish a stable, climax community of gut flora. If you take antibiotics, you trigger a secondary succession event, wiping the slate clean and forcing the community to rebuild from scratch. You now understand the flow of time. You see the lichen dissolving the rock. You see the alder tree sacrificing itself for the spruce. You understand that the landscape you see outside your window is not a permanent fixture, but a single frame in a very long movie. But what actually powers this movie? Trees do not grow from nothing. Animals do not move without fuel. The entire system is a machine that requires energy to run. It requires a constant input of power from the stars and a constant recycling of atoms from the earth. We must now look at the physics of life. We must trace the path of the sunbeam as it turns into a leaf, then into a deer, and then into heat. Our next lesson explores the currency of the ecosystem. Lesson 13. Ecosystem Energetics and Biogeochemistry. This lesson is titled Ecosystem Energetics and Biogeochemistry. It sounds complex, but it is simply the study of the fuel that powers the machine. Until now, we have looked at the players on the stage. Now, we look at the currency they use. We look at the energy that flows from the stars and the matter that cycles through the soil. We are tracing the path of the sunbeam as it becomes a leaf, then a deer, then a wolf, and finally heat rising back into the night sky. Relax and visualize the golden flow of power that connects all living things. There are two fundamental laws you must understand. First, energy flows. It enters the system as sunlight, moves through the food web, and eventually exits as heat. It is a one-way street. It is never recycled. The sun must shine every day, or the system stops. Second, matter cycles. The atoms that make up your body, the carbon, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, have been on Earth for billions of years. They are used, discarded, and used again. You are made of the same atoms that once made a dinosaur, a fern, and a prehistoric ocean. Matter is a closed loop. Let us follow the energy first. It begins with the sun. When sunlight hits a forest, most of it is reflected or absorbed by the ground as heat. only about 1% is captured by plants. This captured energy is called gross primary productivity, GPP. It is the total income of the ecosystem. But the plants are not just batteries, they are living things. They need to burn some of that energy just to stay alive, to breathe, to repair cells, to grow roots. This cost of living is called respiration. If you subtract the energy the plant burns from the total energy it captured, you are left with net primary productivity, NPP. This is the crucial number. NPP is the amount of new biomass created, new wood, new leaves, new seeds. It is the only energy available to be eaten by the rest of the food web. It is the bottom line of the planet's budget. When a caterpillar eats a leaf, it is consuming that NPP. But here, we hit a hard rule of physics, the second law of thermodynamics. Energy transfers are inefficient. When the caterpillar digests the leaf, it loses energy. It loses it as waste, faces. It loses it as heat, metabolism. It uses it to crawl. Only a tiny fraction is actually turned into new caterpillar flesh. This leads to the 10% rule. In general, only about 10% of the energy at one trophic level is passed up to the next. If you have 1,000 calories of grass, you will only get 100 calories of grasshopper. From that, you will only get 10 calories of bird, and from that, only 1 calorie of hawk. This is why food chains are short. This is why you rarely see a predator that eats lions. There simply isn't enough energy left at the top of the pyramid to support a 5th or 6th level. The energy has all leaked away as heat. While energy flows through and vanishes, matter is trapped here with us. It must be recycled. This is the study of biogeochemical cycles. We track the movement of specific elements through the biological, geological, and chemical systems. Let us look at the carbon cycle. Carbon is the backbone of life. It exists in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, $CO, $2. Plants inhale it and use sunlight to forge it into sugar. This is photosynthesis. It locks the carbon into a solid form, wood and flesh. When we breathe, or when we die and rot, bacteria break those bonds, releasing the carbon back into the air as $CO, $2. It is a breath in and a breath out on a planetary scale. For millions of years, some of that carbon was buried in swamps, becoming coal and oil. It was taken out of the cycle. By burning it today, we are suddenly dumping millions of years of saved carbon back into the atmosphere all at once, overwhelming the system. Even more critical is the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is essential for building DNA and proteins. The atmosphere is 78% nitrogen gas, $N, $2. But here is the cruel joke. Plants and animals cannot use nitrogen gas. The bond between the two nitrogen atoms is too strong to break. We are swimming in a sea of nitrogen, but we cannot drink a drop. We rely entirely on microscopic bacteria in the soil to do it for us. This process is called nitrogen fixation. These specialized bacteria break the strong bond and turn the gas into ammonia and nitrates forms that plants can absorb. Without these invisible microbes, no plant could grow and no animal could exist. We are alive only because of the charity of bacteria. Finally, consider the phosphorus cycle. Unlike carbon and nitrogen, phosphorus does not have a gas phase. It does not float in the air. It is locked in rocks. It is released only by the slow weathering of rain washing over stone. It washes into the soil, enters the plants, then the animals, and eventually washes into the ocean, where it sinks to the bottom. It can take millions of years for geological uplift to push that rock back up to the surface. This makes phosphorus a limiting factor. It is usually the scarcest nutrient. If you see a lush forest suddenly stop growing, it is often because the phosphorus ran out. Why does ecosystem energetics matter to you? It dictates the efficiency of our civilization. Consider the human diet. Because of the 10% rule, eating meat is energetically expensive. If you eat a steak, you are acting as a secondary consumer. You are eating the cow that ate the corn. It takes roughly 10 calories of corn to make 1 calorie of beef. If you eat the corn directly, you skip the middleman. You gain 100% of the available energy instead of 10%. This is why, as the human population grows towards 10 billion, there is immense pressure to move toward a plant-based diet. It is not just about ethics, it is about thermodynamics. The Earth can support more vegetarians than carnivores simply because they are feeding lower on the energy pyramid, where the energy is most abundant. We also see the impact of broken cycles in eutrophication. This happens when we use too much fertilizer. We dig up phosphorus from mines and fix nitrogen in factories, then dump it on our fields. When it rains, this excess nutrient load washes into lakes and oceans. The algae in the water, which were previously limited by a lack of food, suddenly go into a feeding frenzy. They bloom, covering the surface in green slime. When they die, the bacteria that decompose them use up all the oxygen in the water. The fish suffocate. We created a dead zone by breaking the slow, natural speed of the biogeochemical cycles. Understanding these cycles is also the key to space travel. If we ever want to live on Mars, we cannot bring infinite food and oxygen. We will have to build a closed ecological life support system. We will have to engineer a perfect carbon cycle and a perfect nitrogen cycle inside a bubble, where every exhale is captured and turned back into food. We will have to become masters of biogeochemistry to survive away from Earth. You now see the machine at work. You see the sunlight pouring in, driving the engine. You see the atoms of carbon and nitrogen spinning in their great, slow circles, moving from rock to air to blood and back again. You understand that we are made of borrowed matter, energized by a distant star. But now, we must face the reality of our time. We are not just watching these cycles, we are disrupting them. We are changing the chemistry of the air. We are unraveling the food webs. We have become a geological force. We arrive now at the final chapter. We must apply everything we have learned from the individual to the ecosystem to the urgent task of preservation. Our final lesson is the science of saving the world. Lesson 14, Conservation Biology and Global Ecology. Our final lesson is titled Conservation Biology and Global Ecology. This is where science meets ethics. It is where our understanding of the world meets our responsibility to protect it. We are no longer just observers watching the play. We are actors on the stage, and we have rewritten the script. In this final hour, we will apply our science to the preservation of the biosphere. We will look at the damage, but more importantly, we will look at the solutions. Breathe deeply, and prepare to face the reality of the Anthropocene. Conservation biology is often called a crisis discipline. It is similar to surgery in an emergency room. We often have to make decisions with incomplete information because waiting for perfect data would mean losing the patient. The patient, in this case, is biodiversity. We are currently living in a new geological epoch called the Anthropocene. This term, meaning the age of humans, acknowledges that human activity is now the dominant influence on climate and the environment. We have moved more dirt than the rivers. We have fixed more nitrogen than all the bacteria in the soil combined. We have altered the chemistry of the atmosphere. To understand the threat, we categorize the drivers of extinction into what Jared Diamond called the evil quartet, though we have since added a fifth. The first and most devastating is habitat destruction. When we cut down a forest to plant soy, or drain a wetland to build a mall, we are not just killing the individuals who lived there, we are destroying the address of the species. If the habitat is gone, the species has nowhere to go. It is the leading cause of extinction globally. The second is overexploitation. This is taking more than the population can replace. We see this in the collapse of the Atlantic cod fishery, where giant trawlers scooped up fish faster than they could breed. We treated a biological resource like a mine, assuming it would last forever. It did not. The third is invasive species. As we travel the world, we bring hitchhikers with us, rats on ships, pythons in cargo holds, weeds on our shoes. These invaders arrive in ecosystems that have no defense against them. They are biological pollution, unraveling millions of years of evolutionary balance. The fourth is co-extinction. This is the domino effect. If a specific species of bird goes extinct, the lice that lived only on that bird go extinct too. The flower that relied only on that bird for pollination also dies. It is the chain reaction of loss. And finally, the fifth driver, looming over everything, is global climate change. By burning fossil fuels, we are releasing ancient carbon back into the cycle, thickening the blanket of the atmosphere and warming the planet. This is shifting those zones of tolerance we talked about in Lesson 2, Faster Than Life Can Move. But conservation biology is not just about cataloguing disasters, it is about fixing them. We have a toolbox of solutions. One of the most powerful tools is restoration ecology. This is the science of healing. We can take a degraded ecosystem, a strip mine, a polluted river, an overgrazed prairie, and nudge it back toward health. We can replant the native grasses. We can reintroduce the beavers to fix the streams. We can physically remove the dams to let the salmon run again. It is slow work, but it proves that damage is not always permanent. We also use the strategy of protected areas. This is the idea of setting aside land where nature comes first. But we have learned that simply drawing a line on a map is not enough. If we create a park that is an isolated island in a sea of concrete, the animals inside will eventually succumb to the alley effect or genetic inbreeding. We must design wildlife corridors, strips of protected land that connect the parks, allowing animals to migrate, mate, and move in response to climate change. We are trying to stitch the fragmented landscape back together. We prioritize our efforts using the concept of biodiversity hotspots. These are areas that are incredibly rich in species found nowhere else, endemic species, but are also under high threat. Places like the tropical Andes, the forests of Madagascar, and the fynbos of South Africa. By focusing our limited money and time on these hotspots, we can save the maximum amount of genetic diversity. It is ecological triage. We also look at the edge effect. When we fragment a forest, we create more edges areas, exposed to wind, light, and predators. The deep, dark forest interior shrinks. Many species, like certain songbirds, cannot survive on the edge. Conservationists now try to design circular reserves rather than long, thin ones to maximize the safe, deep core of the habitat. Why does this matter? Why should we care if a frog in the Amazon goes extinct? First, there is the utilitarian argument. Nature provides us with ecosystem services that we could never afford to pay for. The wetlands filter our water, the insects pollinate our crops, the forests regulate our climate. The plants provide us with medicines. Aspirin came from willow bark, and Taxol, a cancer drug, came from the yew tree. Every time a species dies, we might be losing the cure for a disease we haven't even discovered yet. We are burning the library before we have read the books. Second, there is the ecological argument. As we learned, ecosystems are webs. You can cut a few strings and the web holds, but if you cut too many, it collapses. We do not know which species is the keystone that holds the whole structure up. Saving biodiversity is an insurance policy for our own survival. And finally, there is the ethical argument. This is the belief that other species have an intrinsic right to exist, regardless of their value to us. It is the recognition that we are not the owners of this planet, but merely the current tenants. We are seeing success stories. The bald eagle was nearly wiped out by the pesticide DDT. We banned the chemical, protected the habitat, and today the eagle soars over our rivers again. The humpback whale was hunted to the brink. We banned whaling, and their populations have rebounded spectacularly. These victories prove that when we apply the principles of ecology, when we stop killing the parents, K-selection, protect the food web, community ecology, and clean up the toxins, biogeochemistry, nature can heal. This concludes our course on ecology. You have walked the hierarchy from the individual to the biosphere. You have learned the laws of energy and the logic of evolution. As you drift into sleep, let this final thought stay with you. You are not separate from nature. You are made of carbon and water, just like the oak tree. You consume energy, just like the wolf. You are part of a population, a community, and an ecosystem. The rules we have studied apply to you. Ecology is not just a science, it is a way of seeing. It is the realization that everything is connected. When you wake, you will see the world differently. You will see the web. Rest now. Let the forest, the ocean, and the wind fade into the dark, you are safe in the household of nature. Lesson 15. Landscape Ecology and Biogeography. Landscape ecology is the study of spatial heterogeneity. That is a complex phrase for a simple idea. The world is not uniform. It is a mosaic. When you look down from an airplane, you don't see an endless ocean of identical trees. You see patches. We define the landscape using three elements: the patch, the matrix, and the corridor. Imagine a farm. You see a small woodlot of trees. That is a patch. It is a specific area that differs from its surroundings. Now, look at the endless fields of corn that surround that woodlot. That is the matrix. The matrix is the dominant background cover. Finally, see the row of hedges connecting the woodlot to the river. That is the corridor. Ecology happens in the tension between these shapes. An animal living in the patch is like a castaway on an island. To find a mate, it must cross the hostile matrix. If the matrix is dangerous, like a highway or a parking lot, the patch becomes a prison. If the matrix is soft like a garden, the patch is a home. This brings us to the theory of island biogeography, one of the most elegant mathematical theories in all of science, developed by Robert MacArthur and E. O. Wilson. They asked a simple question: what determines how many species live on an island? They found that it comes down to two factors: size and distance. First, the species area curve. Larger islands support more species. This seems obvious, but the math is precise. A larger island has more habitats, hills, valleys, streams, and therefore more niches. It can support larger populations, which are less likely to go extinct by accident. Second, the distance effect. Islands close to the mainland support more species than islands far away. The mainland is the source, the reservoir of life. If an island is close, it is easy for new seeds and birds to arrive. Immigration. If it is far, immigration is rare. The number of species on an island is a dynamic equilibrium, a balance between the rate of immigration, new arrivals, and the rate of extinction, locals dying out. You might be thinking, I don't live on an island, so this doesn't apply to me. But in the modern world, everything is an island. A park in the middle of a city is an island of green in a matrix of concrete. A mountain top is an island of cold in a matrix of warm valleys. A lake is an island of water in a matrix of land. The laws of island biogeography apply to all of them. This leads us to the concept of the metapopulation. This is a population of populations. Imagine a frog that lives in 5 small ponds separated by dry fields. The frogs in Pond A rarely see the frogs in Pond B, but occasionally, one brave frog hops across the field. This movement is gene flow. It is vital. If Pond A dries up and all the frogs die, the population is locally extinct. But because of the metapopulation connection, frogs from Pond B can eventually migrate over and recolonize Pond A. This is called the rescue effect. The landscape functions like a blinking string of Christmas lights. Individual lights might go out, local extinction, but as long as the wiring connects them, corridors, the whole string stays lit, regional persistence. However, we must also revisit the edge effect in this spatial context. When humans carve up the landscape, we create artificial edges. If you build a road through a forest, you haven't just lost the trees under the asphalt. You have changed the microclimate for hundreds of feet on either side. Sunlight penetrates deeper, drying out the soil. Wind knocks down more trees. Predators like raccoons use the road as a highway to hunt deep in the woods. A patch might look big on a map, but if it is full of holes and edges, it might have zero core habitat left. It is a hollow shell. Why is landscape ecology the handbook for saving the world? Because it settles the SLOS debate. SLOS stands for single, large, or several small. Conservationists used to argue, is it better to create one giant national park or 5 small parks that equal the same total area? Landscape ecology gives us the answer. Generally, single large is better. A large patch has a lower ratio of edge to interior. It can support top predators like tigers that need huge territories. It is more resilient. But if we must have several small, we know what to do. We must connect them. This is the science behind the wildlife corridor movement. We are building bridges over highways in Banff to let bears cross. We are planting hedgerows between farms in England to let dormice travel. We are trying to turn isolated islands back into a continent. We also use this science to predict disease. A landscape with broken, fragmented forests brings humans into closer contact with the edges where wildlife lives. This increases the risk of zoonotic spillover viruses, jumping from animals to us. Lyme disease, for example, is more common in fragmented suburbs than in deep, unbroken forests, because the mice that carry it thrive on the edges. You now understand the map. You see the patches of green, the matrix of grey, and the thin lifelines of corridors connecting them. You understand that the size of the island and its distance from the shore dictate the richness of life. But so far, we have walked mostly on solid ground. We have spoken of forests, fields, and mountains. Yet, the majority of our planet is not land, it is water. The rules of ecology change when you are submerged. Gravity works differently. Light works differently. Oxygen works differently. To complete your understanding of the biosphere, we must dive beneath the surface. We must explore the dark, cold depths and the sunlit shallows. Lesson 16. Aquatic Ecosystems. We are leaving the solid ground to explore the liquid world. We will descend into the freshwater lakes and rivers and then drift out into the vast, salty oceans. The rules of life are different here. Gravity is weaker. Light is scarce. Oxygen must be dissolved. Relax and let the current carry you as we explore the limnology of lakes and the marine biology of the seas. We divide the aquatic world into two great realms based on salt, freshwater and marine. Let us begin with freshwater. The study of inland waters is called limnology. When we look at a lake, we see distinct zones defined by light. At the edge is the littoral zone. This is the shallow water near the shore where sunlight reaches the mud. Here, rooted plants like lilies and cattails can grow. It is the most diverse part of the lake, teeming with frogs, insects, and small fish. It is the nursery. Further out is the limnetic zone. This is the open surface water. It is too deep for rooted plants. Here, the primary producers are phytoplankton microscopic algae drifting in the sun. They are the grass of the lake. They are eaten by zooplankton, which are eaten by fish. Below this, where the sunlight fades into darkness, is the profundal zone. It is cold and dark. No photosynthesis can happen here. The only food that arrives is the marine snow, dead algae, and fish poop raining down from above. The organisms here are decomposers and scavengers, adapted to low oxygen. Now, let us turn to the ocean. It is far vaster, but it follows similar rules of light. We divide it by depth. The photic zone is the top layer where light penetrates. This is where almost all ocean life lives. Below 200 meters is the aphotic zone, perpetual darkness. But the ocean has something lakes do not: tides. The intertidal zone is the harshest environment on Earth. Twice a day, it is submerged in salty ocean water. Twice a day, it is exposed to the burning sun and drying wind. The creatures here, barnacles, mussels, crabs, must be amphibious tough guys. They glue themselves to rocks to avoid being washed away and clam up tight to avoid drying out. Water has unique physical properties that shape life. The most important is thermal stratification. In the summer, the sun heats the top layer of a lake. This warm water is less dense, so it floats on top of the cold, heavy water at the bottom. The lake becomes layered like a cake. The layers do not mix. This creates a problem. The oxygen is at the top, from the air, but the nutrients are at the bottom, from rotting matter. In the autumn, the air cools. The surface water gets cold and heavy. It sinks. This triggers the fall turnover. The entire lake mixes. The nutrients from the bottom rush to the top, and the oxygen from the top rushes to the bottom. This mixing is the heartbeat of the lake. Without it, the bottom would suffocate and the top would starve. In the ocean, we see upwelling. This happens when winds blow surface water away from the shore, pulling deep, cold, nutrient-rich water up to replace it. These upwelling zones, like the coast of Peru or California, are the most productive fishing grounds on Earth. The cold water acts like liquid fertilizer, triggering massive blooms of plankton that feed billions of anchovies and sardines. We must also mention the estuary. This is where the river meets the sea. Fresh water mixes with salt water to create brackish water. Estuaries are the kidneys of the planet. The marshes and mangroves filter out pollutants and sediments before they reach the ocean. They are also incredibly productive nurseries. Most of the fish we eat spend their childhood hiding in the safe, murky waters of an estuary. Why does understanding aquatic ecosystems matter? Because water is our most critical resource, and we are breaking it. We are seeing the collapse of coral reefs due to ocean acidification. As we pump CO2 into the air, the ocean absorbs it. This turns the water slightly acidic. This acid steals the carbonate ions that corals need to build their skeletons. They are literally dissolving. A coral reef is the rainforest of the sea. If it dies, a quarter of all marine species lose their home. We also face the issue of microplastics. In aquatic systems, everything eventually flows downhill to the ocean. Plastic does not biodegrade, it photodegrades, breaking into tiny microscopic dust. Zooplankton mistake these plastic bits for food. The plastic moves up the food chain from plankton to shrimp to tuna to us. We are now part of the aquatic ecosystem in the worst way possible. Finally, we must respect the wetlands. For centuries, humans drained swamps, thinking they were useless disease pits. We now know that wetlands are sponges. They absorb floodwaters during storms and release them slowly during droughts. By destroying wetlands, we have removed the planet's natural flood insurance, leading to the catastrophic flooding we see in cities today. You now understand the liquid world. You see the layers of the lake, the turnover of the seasons, and the harsh rhythm of the tides. You understand that water is not just a backdrop, it is a living, moving force that connects the mountains to the sea. But the Earth is vast. We have explored the general rules, the physics, the populations, the water. Now, we must look at the specific flavors of the land. Why is a desert a desert? Why is a rainforest a rainforest? We enter the study of biomes. We will travel across the globe, visiting the great biological provinces of the planet. We will see the tundra, the taiga, and the savanna. Our next lesson takes us on a world tour. Lesson 17. Terrestrial biomes. A biome is not just a place. It is a community of plants and animals that have adapted to a specific climate. It is a biological province. From the frozen north to the steaming equator, the Earth is divided into these massive zones of life. We will travel through them, one by one. We will see why a desert is not a forest, and why the tundra is not a grassland. Relax and prepare to take a tour of the living world. The type of biome that exists in any given place is determined almost entirely by two physical factors: temperature and precipitation. Imagine a graph. On one axis is heat, on the other is rain. If you have high heat and high rain, you get a tropical rainforest. If you have high heat but zero rain, you get a desert. If you have low heat and moderate rain, you get a boreal forest. Every biome is simply a different combination of these two ingredients. Let us begin at the equator and move toward the poles. First, the tropical rainforest. This is the cradle of biodiversity. It rains here almost every day. The temperature is constant around 25 degrees Celsius year-round. Because of this stability, life has had millions of years to specialize. The structure is vertical. There is the dark forest floor, the understory, the canopy, and the emergent layer. The competition here is for light. Plants will strangle each other just to reach a patch of sun. The soil, surprisingly, is poor and thin because the hungry roots absorb nutrients the moment they hit the ground. Move slightly north or south, and the rain becomes seasonal. We enter the savanna. This is the biome of the lion and the zebra. It is a grassland scattered with occasional trees. Fire is a key player here. During the dry season, lightning strikes ignite the grass. The trees have evolved thick, corky bark to survive the flames, while the grasses burn down to their roots and regrow with the first rain. It is a landscape shaped by grazing and fire. Further still, where the rain fails almost completely, we find the desert. A desert is defined by dryness, not heat. Antarctica is technically a desert because it rarely snows. But in hot deserts, like the Sahara, life is a master of water conservation. Plants like cacti have evolved into living tanks, storing water in their fleshy stems and turning their leaves into spines to prevent evaporation. Animals are nocturnal, hiding in cool burrows during the day and emerging only when the moon rises. As we move into the temperate zones where you likely live, we find the temperate deciduous forest. Deciduous means falling off. These forests have a superpower. They can shut down. In winter, water freezes and becomes unavailable. A broad leaf would just lose moisture and die. So, these trees drop their leaves, seal their branches, and enter a state of dormancy, like a bear hibernating. They survive the harsh winter by simply waiting for spring. In the center of continents, where there is not enough rain for trees but too much for a desert, we find the temperate grassland, the prairies or steppes. These are the breadbaskets of the world. The roots of these grasses grow deep, sometimes 2 or 3 meters down, creating the richest, deepest soil on Earth. This is why we have converted almost all of them into farmland for wheat and corn. Move further north, and the winters become brutal. We enter the taiga, or boreal forest. This is a biome of needles. The dominant trees are evergreens, spruce, fir, and pine. They are shaped like cones to shed the heavy snow. Their needles are coated in wax to hold in moisture. The soil here is acidic and slow to decompose. It is a silent, shadowed world that stretches like a green belt across Canada and Russia. Finally, at the top of the world, we reach the tundra. Here, the subsoil is permanently frozen, a layer called permafrost. Because the ice never melts, tree roots cannot penetrate deep enough to stand up. So, there are no trees. It is a landscape of mosses, lichens, and dwarf shrubs. The growing season is only a few weeks long. In summer, the top inch of soil melts, creating vast, mosquito-filled bogs that attract millions of migrating birds. It is a fragile, frozen garden. Why does understanding biomes matter? Because they are moving. As the planet warms, the climate map is being redrawn. The specific combination of heat and rain that creates a boreal forest is shifting north. The trees are trying to follow, but they cannot walk. They can only disperse seeds. If the climate shifts faster than the seeds can fly, the forest dies. We are seeing ghost forests along coasts where salt water is invading freshwater biomes. We are also seeing the melting of the permafrost in the tundra. This is a ticking time bomb. The frozen soil holds billions of tons of ancient carbon-dead plants that never rotted. As it melts, bacteria wake up and eat that carbon, releasing it as methane, a potent greenhouse gas. This creates a feedback loop. The warmer it gets, the more the tundra melts. The more it melts, the warmer it gets. Furthermore, our agriculture depends on biomes. You cannot grow coffee in a taiga. You cannot grow wheat in a rainforest. As biomes shift, the places where we can grow food will shift too, disrupting economies and food security. Transition to next lesson. You have now traveled the globe. You have felt the humidity of the jungle, the dry heat of the desert, and the biting cold of the tundra. You understand that life is not just a random scattering of species, but a precise response to the climate. But there is one final piece of the puzzle. We have talked about how biomes are naturally formed, but today, there is a new force shaping the landscape. There is a new architect. We cannot ignore the impact of human civilization. We modify, we extract, and we manage. To truly understand ecology in the 21st century, we must understand the intersection of nature and society. We must look at the science of sustainability. Our final advanced module explores the future of our relationship with the planet. Lesson 18. Sustainability and Human Ecology. We are not separate from the systems we have studied. We are made of the same carbon, we drink the same water, and we rely on the same sun. But we are unique in our ability to alter those systems. This lesson explores how we can live within the laws of ecology rather than breaking them. It is the science of the future. Relax and open your mind to the challenge of our time. Human ecology is the study of the interaction between human social systems and the ecosystem. At its heart is the concept of sustainability. Sustainability is often a buzzword, but in ecology, it has a precise definition. It is the ability to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It is about balance. It is about living off the interest, not the capital. To understand this, we look at the ecological footprint. This is a measure of how much land and water a human population requires to produce the resources it consumes and to absorb its waste. Right now, the global human footprint is roughly 1.7 Earths. We are using resources faster than the planet can regenerate them. We are in ecological overshoot. This overshoot is driven by the I equals PAT equation. This simple formula states that our impact I on the environment is the product of three factors: population, P, affluence, A, and technology, T. Population is the sheer number of us. Affluence is how much each person consumes. A person in a wealthy nation uses far more energy and materials than a person in a developing nation. Technology is the wild card. Technology can increase impact like a chainsaw that cuts trees faster than an axe, or decrease impact like a solar panel that generates clean energy. The goal of sustainability is to adjust these variables so that our total impact falls back within the carrying capacity of the Earth. Let us look deeper at the mechanisms of sustainability. It is not just about recycling. It is about redesigning our systems to mimic nature. This is a field called biomimicry. Nature does not produce waste. In a forest, a fallen leaf becomes food for a worm, which becomes food for a bird, whose waste becomes food for the tree. It is a closed loop. Our current human economy is a straight line. We extract, we make, we use, and we dump. This is the take-make-waste model. Sustainability seeks to create a circular economy. In this model, every product is designed to be disassembled and reused. The waste from one factory becomes the fuel for another. We stop mining the earth and start mining our own trash. We mimic the biogeochemical cycles we learned about in Lesson 13. We also must address urban ecology. For the first time in history, more than half of humanity lives in cities. A city is a voracious ecosystem. It sucks in massive amounts of food, water, and energy, and spits out massive amounts of sewage and pollution. It is a heterotrophic ecosystem. It cannot feed itself. Sustainable urbanism tries to close these loops. It involves green infrastructure using wetlands to treat sewage instead of chemical plants, or using green roofs to absorb stormwater and cool the buildings. It means urban agriculture, growing food on rooftops and in vacant lots to reduce the distance our food travels. It means redesigning the city to function less like a parasite and more like a self-sustaining forest. Why is this the most important lesson of all? Because the laws of ecology are non-negotiable. You cannot negotiate with the laws of thermodynamics. You cannot argue with a nitrogen cycle. If we ignore the carrying capacity of our environment, nature will eventually impose a limit for us. We saw this in Lesson 7 with the reindeer on Street Matthew Island, who overshot their food supply and crashed. The goal of human ecology is to achieve a soft landing rather than a crash. We are already seeing the shift. We are moving from linear energy, burning fossil fuels once, to cyclic energy, harvesting the eternal flow of the sun and wind. We are seeing the rise of regenerative agriculture, which doesn't just stop damaging the soil, but actively heals it by sequestering carbon and rebuilding organic matter. This shift requires a change in mindset. It requires us to move from an anthropocentric worldview, where humans are the center of everything, to an ecocentric worldview, where we see ourselves as a thread in the web. It acknowledges that our health is inextricably linked to the health of the biosphere. We cannot have healthy people on a sick planet. Conclusion and final transition. You have now completed the full course. You have walked the long road from the atom to the atmosphere. You have seen the hidden connections that bind the living world together. You know now that the air you breathe is a gift from the plankton. You know that the soil that feeds you is a gift from the rocks and the worms. You know that you are not an observer of nature, but a participant. As you sleep, let these lessons integrate. Let the knowledge of the forest, the ocean, and the cycle of life become part of your intuition. You are a creature of the earth, awake to its complexity and alive to its wonder. Rest now. The lesson is over. the journey continues.